So allow me to introduce our session, our webinar facilitator for this webinar. Her name is Concepta Mooti. She is the current Director, Foundations Engagement at ChildFund International, and she has a diverse experience of over 12 years in fundraising, strategic storytelling within communication, grants management, and project leadership. Her passion is driven or is centered in development, communication, and fundraising. And I'm excited to have her take the floor and take center stage as she leads us through the topic for the session. Welcome, Concepta.
Thank you, Mary and Lynette. Lynette is back. Do you want to finalize the remarks? Then I can take it up.
Yeah, thank you, Concepta. My apologies, I don't know. I was logged off, sorry. Yeah, so on my few remarks, I don't know where I was, but the importance of the webinar today is just for us to engage in a very discussing manner, to be able also to share our contribution in shaping the sustainable future for our planet. So that is our main agenda today. And welcome so much, Concepta. And thank you so much for accepting our invitation just to take our members and also to share your insight on this very important topic, especially to our members who are very keen on sustainability and also restoration of our ecosystem. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lynette and Mary, for the invitation. Good morning, all of you. Allow me to share my screen in a bit. Mary, kindly confirm you can see my screen.
Yes, I can.
Oh, thank you. So good morning once again. My name is Concepta Mooti. I am so delighted to be part of this team. Resource mobilization fundraising is part of my DNA, and I will do this effortlessly and again. So thank you so much for the welcome. And I'm happy members are now getting attention towards resource mobilization for the ecosystem, because from where we sit, it's an urgent action point that needs to be resourced for. So in my introduction, I want us to appreciate that this is a collective responsibility for every one of us as members, as business people, that resource mobilization is not a one-man's show. And again, I also want us to appreciate that resource mobilization strategies cannot only focus on money for conservation, but it has to also tackle the issue of how we use our resources across the economy. So those are two things that I want us to have at the back of our mind as we continue to engage. And so I just wanted us to understand that the underlying drivers of the ecosystem protection and restoration are so important for us to get them right, so that we can critically think on how we systematically use our resources, how we systematically fundraise for the ecosystem restoration and protection. And so it's a 360 approach. It entails everybody. It entails integrating both finances, human resources, institutional resources, government. And so, as I mentioned again, it's a collective approach. I'm trying to move my slides. What's happening? Just a minute as I figure it out. Let me try and reshare again. I don't know why my slides are not moving. Share 1 minute. Mary, is it up again?
Yes.
Okay. So the objectives of today's webinar, I know we want to identify ways of how to resource mobilization for conservation restoration, but I want us to answer 4 questions within this hour. So one is, why is it important to revise our existing approaches to resource mobilization? I'm already considering the fact that we are already doing resource mobilization, but this time I want us to do it differently. I want us to change our mindset towards resource mobilization. Then the second question that I want us to answer is, what are the key objectives for the effective resource mobilization? We've been doing resource mobilization, but now how do we make it more effective so that we are able to attain our goals? Then thirdly, how can we strengthen our efforts in resource mobilization? That is the third question that I want us to answer. And finally, where do we source for funding? Because it is essential for us to know, where is the funding, where is the money? So those are the 4 points that I want us to answer, questions that I want us to answer. And so the first question is, why is it important to revise existing approaches to resource mobilization? So one, as I said, is when we were beginning, that we need a mindset shift, we need a culture shift, because these approaches these days, they are always changing. And the reason is because the ecosystem is also changing. The different problems that we encountered in 10 years ago are not the same problems that our ecosystem is facing. So there's now climate change. So we need to rethink on our climate actions. And so how do we now fundraise differently, or resource mobilize differently from how we used to do it before? And then the issue of adaptive management. So how now do we need to change over time to be able to reflect the new problems, or to address the new problems that are now coming? So that is one of the reasons why we need to revise our existing approaches, because the ecosystem is changing. The second thing is increased demand for funding. Everybody is looking for funds. So we need to do it differently. So we need to devise creative ways. We need to approach our donors differently. We need to better align with their methodologies. We need to write differently so that we are able to get those resources that are already very scarce. And then in terms of resource allocation, how then do we allocate our resources efficiently to be able to realize our impact? We don't just get funding and then we are not strategic in how we are going to use the resources. So increased demand of resources and scarcity of funding is another push for us to rethink our strategies. And then in the spirit of thinking about our fundraising, our business models, it's important for us to understand the red and blue ocean approach, or the red and blue ocean business strategies. These are business strategies that are currently existing, or they've been existing, but we just need to refresh our minds through them. So red ocean, this is where we are. We already existing. We understand, many people understand the market. We are competing for the scarce resources with many donors, with many organizations. But we need to shift our minds to the blue ocean business strategy. These are business strategies where no one has invented the wheel. These are unique priorities, new demands, and so it needs us to look for new donors. We need to look for new markets and think differently, because everybody is already in the ocean, red ocean. So we need to shift our minds to the blue ocean. So what is it that we can do differently? How effective can we be able to do our programs? How do we communicate our impact? That reason why we need to rethink our fundraising or resource mobilization strategies is because of financial constraints. Budgets that are approaches on how we maneuver our budgets as much as they are little, and then also the issue of diversification. Can we now start thinking beyond grants? Can we start thinking about the green bonds, the impact invest, and different innovating funding models that can be able to help us enhance our financial sustainability? Then the fourth reason why we need also to rethink about our approaches is the enhanced collaboration. These days, we keep saying that for us to be able to succeed in fundraising, collaboration is essential. So how do we collaborate? through cross-sector integration. We need to collaborate and work very closely with the government, with the NGOs, the private sector, with our local communities where the ecosystems are based. We also need to have very effective and strategic partnerships, not just partnerships for the sake of having a partner, but also being able to use the partnership not only for resource mobilization, but also for knowledge sharing. How do we now exchange information that can be able to benefit us resource mobilize? Then the fifth reason is a technological advancement. We just encountered one now. These days, the issues of the AIs, the data analytics, remote sensing. So now how do we capitalize on those opportunities to be able to monitor and manage our ecosystem? Because these approaches and tools, if used effectively, they can be able to help us to resource mobilize for the effectiveness of the ecosystem. Then innovation, we need to always embrace innovation, but also there's a very thin line between embracing innovation and making sure that it is working in our favor. So as we want to explore more options in terms of innovating, we also need to make sure that whatever we are trying to explore has very positive impacts on our ecosystem. Then finally, on the reasons that we need to rethink our resource mobilization approaches is because of the evolving policies and regulations. These days, there are so many policies and environmental regulations that need to be adapted, need to be discussed, need to be understood. And so as an organization, how do we now thrive in such an environment where we have different policies, new policies that we need to adapt? So aligning that with our resource mobilization strategies and framework will enable us to thrive in such an environment. And also the issue of compliance. How do we ensure as an organization we are compliant with the relevant rules and regulations that are required where we are thriving or where we are existing as an organization, to be able to be very friendly to the government's regulations and legal frameworks. So question number 2, remember we had 4 questions, so this is the second question. What are the key objectives for effective resource mobilization for this ecosystem protection and restoration? One key objective is increased financial resources. We need to increase our financial resources. How? One, we need to diversify our funding, as I've mentioned. Let's think beyond the normal grants. Let's do impact investments. Let's venture into carbon trading. Let's venture into green bonds. Let's also rethink, how do we now crowdfund from our members? How do we crowdfund from the public? So that is also very essential. The second one is, how do we leverage on the public-private partnerships? These days, organizations are adapting the ECG policy. So how do we leverage on that? How do we partner with the public? How do we partner with the private and corporate institutions? How do we bring the foundations on board so that we are able to have a wide pool of funding to be able to address our issues around the ecosystem protection and restoration? Then finally, how do we develop sustainable funding mechanism? We want to do some payments from our ecosystems that can be able to support us. Do you want to trade carbon credits? So those are some of the ways that we could ensure that we have financial sustainability. So the second objective is to enhance efficiency and effectiveness. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, how do we optimize or how do we allocate our resources effectively? We need to use data-driven approaches, because we keep saying anything without data is just an opinion. What backs up our approaches? Have we analyzed different data to be able to create even compelling asks from our funders, from our donors? So optimizing resources is key to ensure that we have effective resource mobilization. Then we need also to improve our project design and management. How do we structure our programs? Are they focused on impact? Are they inclusive? Do we show how do we program our work in terms of the program designs? How do we rethink our logical frameworks? How is our methodology? How do we monitor? How do we measure? So all those things are questions that we need to ask ourselves so that we can be able to enhance efficiency and effectiveness. The third reason is strengthen stakeholder engagement. We need to work very closely with our stakeholders. These are our communities, where these ecosystems are. We need to involve them in the decision making because they are key stakeholders. They can either make us succeed in our programs or fail. So how do we loop them in from the onset so that they feel part of the programs and projects? And then how does our engagement with them able to align with our program or project deliverables? So it is essential for us to make sure that the local communities are engaged and engage at the right time, so that we don't just engage them when we are coming to launch the project or to hand over the project. We need to engage them from when we start thinking about developing that proposal, so that we're able also to evaluate them, to develop questionnaires, to conduct focus group discussions with them, to know whether even that project can be able to be sustainable in that area. And then we also need to build multi-sectorial partnerships. This is where we involve research institutions, academic institutions, businesses, indigenous group, because they are all part of a stakeholder engagement. Fourthly, we need to improve our monitoring and evaluation. How do we establish our key performance indicators? How do we establish our metrics? How do we measure them? What measurement do we term as success or failed programs? So it is essential for us to be able to monitor and evaluate our programs, because those indicators are able to give us informed decision on what we are going to ask our donors, because we have indicators and we know what can work and what won't work. And then finally, we need also to ensure accountability. How do we track progress? How long do we track progress? Do we wait until a 3-year period so that we start tracking progress, or do we do quarterly so that we are able to document our successes? We are able to go back and see what works and what doesn't work. Then fifthly, we need to foster policy and institutional support. We need to advocate for supportive policies. Let's reach out to the relevant parliamentary committees on climate change, on tourism. Let's give them recommendation on what, because we are the members on the ground, what can work in terms of developing policies, what doesn't work, what can we revise? Because once we contribute to the policy frameworks, we are able to voice what works and what doesn't. So it is important for us to be able to participate in such forums when the members of parliament are meeting or committees are meeting. Are our agenda a top priority to them? Do they know what we really value as ecotourism sector? What do we need to give priority? What is urgent? What is important? What is desirable from us? So it is important for us to ensure that our voices are heard at the policy level, because everything begins from the policy document. Then the sixth point is we need to support long-term sustainability. We need to plan for longevity. We cannot always be in one area. In case funding ends, how do we then ensure that the community, the stakeholders are able to sustain our gains, so that after a period of time when our project is done, the project doesn't fail? How are we able to encourage them to be able to be sustainable enough, and also build resilience to the communities and the stakeholders in our different ecosystem, to ensure that our programs or our gains that we've managed to within a specific times go over and over again, even without our funding. So being able to develop programs that have a long-term sustainability in them will also ensure that we effectively resource mobilize for the ecosystem protection and restoration. Then the third question was around, 1 minute, was around how do we now strengthen the resource mobilization for ecosystem protection and restoration. One, as an organization or as members, we need a very clear and comprehensive fundraising strategy. Because without a strategy, we will not have something to work towards. So we need to set clear goals in our strategy. let them be measurable, let them be specific, so that we are able to align to those goals. So having a very clear and comprehensive fundraising strategy that has clear goals, has clear metrics, has clear measurable outcomes and targets and timelines and performance indicators is key for us to be able to support resource mobilization. And also within the strategy, we also need to identify our target audience. Who are we going to source from? Because we also need to be very clear, our target market. Is it the individual donors? Is it the corporate donors? Is it foundations? Is it government? Is it donors, international donors? So we also need to also identify our targets audiences on who we are going to resource mobilize from. Then secondly, we need to diversify our funding sources, where government grants and contracts, private sector engagements. These days, most organizations and most corporate have an CSR arm. How do we now rethink as an organization on how do we capitalize the CSR funds for different corporate institutions? Then we have philanthropies and foundations. How do we reach out to different foundations? How do we reach out to different philanthropic institutions for them that are interested in climate conservation, for them, for how and how do we align to their priorities? Because as I mentioned earlier, we need to do a mapping on who is interested with conservation so that we are able to target the right audience. Then crowdfunding and community fundraising, how do we now engage the public? Do we want to do walks? Do we want to set up fundraising platforms, the digital fundraising platform? Do we want to do campaigns? How do we engage the public and the community where these ecosystems either exist or not, to be able to resource mobilize effectively? So diversification of our funding sources needs to be wide, because we have different forums where we can get funding from, as highlighted here. Then thirdly, we need to develop high quality proposal, and we need to be very good in grant writing, because developing of high quality proposals that addresses what the donor is looking out for is one of the effective ways of resource mobilization. Because if we don't develop high quality proposals, high quality grants, high quality pitch decks, high quality concept notes to give to donors, we will not be telling the donors what we want, because these are some of the product or program offerings that we will be going out to the donors with. So development of high quality proposal is very important. Then again, how do we showcase our success stories? How do we want to tell our stories? Which platform do we want to use to tell our successes? We have so many success stories from our previous programs. How do we then document that? How do we want to show the donor that? So that is also another way of effective resource mobilization. Now my screen has hanged again. Oh, there you go. Then the fourth thing that I want us to remember is to leverage on technology and innovation. So as an organization, how do we want to leverage on technology when it comes to resource mobilizing? Do you want to use digital tools? These days, there's fundraising platform online, there's AI, there's social media campaigns, there's email marketing. All these digital fundraising tools have the capacity to reach to our different donors. Then how, again, do we use technology to do our data analytics? Because we want to communicate the right information to the right donors. How do we use technology to be able to leverage on the donor behaviors? Do we take time to understand our donors? Do we know what they prefer? Do we know what engagement they would prefer? Because sometimes we might want to communicate to our donors either using email marketing, but they are good with social media, or we would want to use probably social media platform, but our donors really prefer impact reports or capacity statements. So data analytics is critical. And so we need to ask ourselves, how do we use the technology to be able to analyze our data to know our donor preference? And we also need to build very strong partnership and networks, because we keep saying our network is our network. So we need to do collaborations with research institutions. Remember, we just mentioned about data. Data is key. So research institutions, NGOs that we have similar or shared resources together. So for instance, we could join consortiums, coalitions to be able to leverage on different networks, because sometimes resource mobilization is not only money, as I mentioned. Sometimes we could do partnership with an organization that has a unique strength that we do not possess. So in that spirit of collaboration, it would enhance effective resource mobilization. Then we need to engage and cultivate donors. After we've known what our donors prefer, their outreach, their models of engagement, we need to reach out using the right engagement platform. If our donor prefers social media platform, let's have our social media platform. If the donor prefers impact reports, let's send that to them. So engage and cultivate donors. Be proactive. Don't wait for the donor to come for you. Be the one to engage them. Be the one to send the pitch deck. Be the one to give them a call. So engagement is key for resource mobilization. And it is prudent for us to be proactive when we are engaging our donors, as long as we have done our research, we have mapped out our donors, and we've known what they prefer, so that we don't approach the right donor with the wrong information. That way we are going to be spoiling our relationship. And then the issue of donor recognition. Once the donor has funded us, it is always prudent to send thank you notes, appreciate them in our website, appreciate them along our social media platform. That way they feel valued and the relationship is cultivated for a long time because of the recognition. Then the seventh point is develop and implement a strategic communication plan. I've been talking communications bits and pieces throughout the presentation. So having a strategic communication plan is essential for us. I keep saying it's a very thin line between fundraising and communication. So they go very hand in hand together. So having a very clear plan on how we are going to communicate to our donors is essential. Remember, from our mapping, you'll discover different donors want different communication styles. And so this is where we are able to draft our messaging that is focused to particular donors. Then we utilize our different channels for communications, either newsletters, website, traditional media, for us to be able to reach them, because they can only fund us when they have seen what our capability is. And that can only be done through communication. So it is prudent for us to develop very clear and a strategic communication plan. Then we need to invest in training and development. We need to train our staff. We need to train all of us. And I'm happy that this came up now. This is also part of the capacity building. We need to be informed on how to approach donors. We need to be informed on how we carry out a mapping research for our donors. We need to be involved in and informed on how we now cultivate relationships. How do we sustain them? How do we write proposals? So capacity building is key to strengthen our efforts towards fundraising and resource mobilization, but also to be able to build a foundation for our organization. How do we now strengthen our organizational infrastructure? We need to have proper communication strategies. We need a proper fundraising strategy. We need a proper financial management system, because some of these things are part of the requirements from our donors that we need to have for purposes of accountability and effective resource allocation. Then, as I've mentioned, we need to monitor and evaluate our fundraising efforts. So we need to look back and say, now, apart from capacity building of our staff and building foundation for our organization, how far can we go in terms of monitoring and evaluating our efforts? So we need to track performance, so that how do we now track the partnerships that we have created over time? How are we able to measure them? How are we able to evaluate the proposals that we've been sending over time? So it is important to evaluate our fundraising efforts as an organization and use those merits to assess our progress, because it is important to look back and say, these proposals were rejected because of the quality. So how now do we improve on the quality? So it is important to be able to monitor and evaluate, so that we can also be flexible. Where do we need to adjust Where do we need to have more capacity? Where do we need to build more capacity as an organization so that we can be able to refine our approaches to fundraising? Then finally, we need to foster community and stakeholder engagement, create a community of involvement. You cannot do anything alone. So it is important for us to be able to ensure there is involvement in our community, not only in our community, but with our different stakeholders, with other non-governmental organizations that are in our space. How do we collaborate together? How do we now also engage different actors to be able to make sure that our work is seen? How do we engage do we want to identify brand ambassadors? Do we want to have an influencer for our organization so that they constantly talk about what we do, our impact, our progress, and that way different donors are able to see our work. Then I made a small cartoon here that says success fundraising is both an art and science. So I want us to know that we need the art part of it to be able to develop creative ideas. We need to know how to tell our stories. We need to know how do we develop relationships. We need to know the key messaging that we need to tell the donor. And from the science perspective, we need also to evaluate what is our return on investment on this. What is our strategic alignment with the donors? Have we analyzed data? Are we testing whatever we are doing? So it's both a balance of art and science. So we cannot do without, the art and science cannot do without each other. So that is what I wanted us to address before I tell you where the money is. So where is the money? One, the UN agencies, programs and commissions. So I mapped out for us a couple of them here that we could share with the members. Let's look out for these organizations. Their websites are always updated in terms of the possible partnerships, calls for concept notes. And as I've said, we need to be proactive. Let's reach out. Let's look for contact people in these organizations. Let's be proactive and let's ask for meetings. Let's pitch our work to them, because this is where the money is. And without partnerships, we can only do so little. So examples of the UNDP, UNEP, UNESCO, these are part of the organization that I thought they would align with the conservation part of it. So you can always add more here. And then also there was the international environment funding bodies. We have the Green Climate Fund, we have the Climate Investment Fund, we have the UNEP Fund, and all those. So these are also organizations that we can always research on them, know their key priorities, align our strategies towards them so that we can be able to attract them for funding. Then we have international financial institutions that give funding for conservation and restoration. We have the World Bank, we have the IFC, we have the ADB, we have the European Investment Bank. All these are financial institutions that fund organizations like Ecotourism Kenya. Then the international NGOs, we have different ones that have interest in conservancy. We can always reach out for partnerships. We can always reach out to know more about them. We can always reach out to pitch to them, because they have funding that they give to other institutions like Ecotourism Kenya. So this is opportunity to take up the challenge and be proactive, reach out, do research, have a pitch deck, ask for meetings, engage